The Krylian warfleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of metallic locusts, their ships bristling with plasma cannons and photon torpedoes. Admiral Zektar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Bloodfang, his reptilian features twisted into what his species considered a smile. Below them, the small mining station of Kepler, Tor 2b, hung in space like a ripe fruit waiting to be plucked. "Sir," his communications officer hissed, forked tongue flicking nervously, "we're receiving a transmission from the station." "Put it through," Zektar commanded, his claws clicking against the armrest of his command chair. He expected the usual: pleas for mercy, offers of surrender, perhaps some pathetic attempt at negotiation. What came through the speakers was not what he expected. "Kepler Mining Station to approaching fleet. This is Sarah Martinez, Station Administrator. We see you out there, and we're guessing you're not here for the tour. Before you do whatever it is you're planning to do, we've got fresh coffee brewing and some really good sandwiches if you want to talk this out." The bridge fell silent. Several officers exchanged confused glances. Admiral Zektar's thermal sensors indicated his body temperature had risen slightly, a sign of agitation among his kind. "Did she just offer us food?" whispered the tactical officer. Zektar silenced him with a sharp gesture. The Krylians were known throughout the galaxy as the pack apex predators who showed no mercy, took no prisoners, and certainly did not engage in diplomatic meals with their prey. They had conquered 47 systems in the past decade alone, leaving nothing but debris and terrified survivors in their wake. "Open a channel," Zektar growled. "This is Admiral Zektar of the Krylian Empire. You will surrender immediately and prepare for orbital bombardment. Your pathetic attempts at hospitality will not save you." There was a pause before Sarah's voice crackled back through the comm. "Well, that's unfortunate. The sandwiches really are quite good. We've got this human delicacy called pastrami on rye that I think you might enjoy. Very meaty." Behind her voice, Zektar could hear something unusual: laughter. Not the desperate, hysterical laughter of the doomed, but genuine, warm amusement. It made his scales prickle with unease. "You do realize," Zektar said slowly, "that you are addressing the most feared military force in this sector of the galaxy. We have reduced entire planets to ash." "Oh, I'm sure you have," Sarah replied cheerfully. "Sounds like exhausting work. When's the last time you had a proper meal? Something that didn't come out of a ration tube?" The question caught Zektar completely off guard. When had he last eaten actual food? The Krylian military survived on nutrient paste and synthetic proteins during long campaigns. Fresh food was a luxury reserved for the homeworlds, and he'd been in space for how long now? 6 months? 8? His stomach chose that moment to emit a low growl that echoed across the bridge. Several officers pretended not to notice. "This is ridiculous," Zektar snapped. "Prepare the plasma bombardment array. We'll reduce their station to atoms and be done with this foolishness." "Sir," the weapons officer reported, "we're experiencing some technical difficulties with the main battery." "What kind of difficulties?"
"The targeting computers they appear to be receiving some kind of interference."
"The systems keep defaulting to safe mode." Deep in the bowels of Kepler Mining Station, Marcus Chen wiped grease from his hands and grinned at his workstation. The human mechanic had been monitoring the Krylian ships since they dropped out of hyperspace, and their weapon systems were laughably easy to hack. A few carefully placed electromagnetic pulses disguised as routine maintenance signals, and their entire fleet was effectively neutered. "How's it going down there, Marcus?" Sarah's voice crackled through the intercom. "Like taking candy from a baby," Marcus replied, pulling up the schematics of the Krylian flagship on his screen. "Their security protocols are about 10 years behind standard. I've got remote access to pretty much everything except their life support." "Leave that alone," Sarah warned.
"We're not trying to kill them, just redirect their enthusiasm." Marcus chuckled.
Sarah Martinez was perhaps the most diplomatic person he'd ever met, which made her an excellent station administrator, but sometimes resulted in what he considered excessive kindness toward people trying to blow them up. Still, he had to admit, her approach had worked in the past. The Vorthan raiders who tried to shake them down 6 months ago had ended up staying for dinner and leaving with a trade agreement.
"Their engineering is pretty impressive, though," Marcus admitted, studying the technical readouts.
"These ships are built for speed and firepower. No wonder they've been so successful. Any idea how many crew members they've got?" Marcus ran a quick scan. "Looks like about 2,000 across the whole fleet. That's a lot of mouths to feed." Up on the command deck, Sarah was already formulating a plan. The station's cafeteria could easily accommodate a few hundred visitors, and they had enough supplies to feed an army. Literally, as it turned out. Marcus, what's their ship's atmospheric composition? Standard oxygen-nitrogen mix, slightly higher CO2 than we'd prefer, but breathable. Why? I'm thinking we invite them over for lunch. There was a long pause before Marcus responded. Sarah, you do realize these are the same people who just threatened to turn us into space dust, right? Everyone's cranky when they're hungry, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. Besides, have you looked at their fleet formation? They're all bunched up in attack position. Their ships are practically touching each other. One good electromagnetic pulse and their entire communications network would crash. Marcus's grin widened. I like where this is going. Meanwhile, aboard the Bloodfang, Admiral Zektar was growing increasingly frustrated. His weapons officer had tried everything. Manual overrides, system reboots, even percussive maintenance, but the targeting computers stubbornly refused to lock onto the mining station. Sir, the communications officer ventured. The human administrator is hailing us again. Ignore her. She says she's prepared to beam over a sample of the pastrami on rye for your consideration. Despite himself, Zektar felt his mouth watering. The Krillian diet was primarily carnivorous, and the description of cured meat on bread sounded infinitely more appealing than his last tube of protein paste. Sir, the officer prompted. Tell her we will consider her proposal. Zektar said reluctantly. But any attempt at deception will result in the immediate destruction of her station. Acknowledged Admiral. She's asking about dietary restrictions. Dietary restrictions? Apparently humans have various food allergies and preferences. She wants to ensure the meal is compatible with our physiology. Zektar stared at the communications console as if it had sprouted wings. In all his years of conquest, no one had ever asked about his dietary needs. Even his own military barely bothered to ensure the ration tubes contained the minimum nutrients required for survival. Tell her, no processed sugars. They interfere with our digestive system. Acknowledged. She's also asking if anyone in the fleet is vegetarian. Vegetarian? Apparently some species choose not to consume meat products for ethical or health reasons. Zektar looked around his bridge, noting the confused expressions of his officers. The concept was foreign to Krillian culture, but he had to admit there was something oddly considerate about the question. No vegetarians, he confirmed. We are an entirely carnivorous species. She says perfect, and that she has something called pulled pork that she thinks she'll enjoy. Back on the station, Sarah was coordinating with her small but efficient crew. Kepler 442b was primarily a mining operation with a permanent staff of only 43 humans, but they'd learned to be resourceful. The cafeteria could be quickly reconfigured to accommodate larger groups, and their food synthesizers were top of the line. Jamie, how's our meat situation? She called to the head of food services. Jamie Okafor looked up from his inventory pad. We've got enough protein stock to feed about 500 people a decent meal. More if we stretch it with sides. Perfect. Marcus, any progress on those weapon systems? I've got them locked out completely now, Marcus reported over the comm. They couldn't fire a shot if they wanted to. Their navigation is still functional, so they can get home, but their offensive capabilities are basically zero. Good. Let's keep that our little secret for now. Dr. Alana Vasquez, the station's chief medical officer, approached Sarah with a concerned expression. Sarah, are you sure about this? The Krylians have a reputation for violence. What if this is some kind of trap? Sarah considered the question seriously. Elena wasn't wrong to be cautious. The Krillian Empire had left a trail of conquered worlds across the galaxy. But something about this situation felt different. Look at their formation, Sarah said, pointing to the tactical display. They came in aggressive, sure, but they're maintaining a defensive posture now. If they really wanted to destroy us, they would have started shooting the moment they arrived. Maybe their weapons are malfunctioning, Elena suggested. Sarah smiled but didn't elaborate. Maybe... Either way, they're here. They're clearly hungry, and we have food. Sometimes the best diplomacy happens over a good meal. Aboard the Bloodfang, Admiral Zektar found himself in an unprecedented situation. His tactical officers were running diagnostics on systems that appeared to be functioning perfectly, yet refused to engage combat protocols. His communications officer was fielding increasingly detailed questions about preferred beverage choices and food temperatures, and his own stomach continued to emit increasingly audible protests. Sir, his first officer, Commander Veltok, approached cautiously. Perhaps we should consider the strategic implications of this invitation. Elaborate. If the humans are confident enough to invite us aboard their station, they may have defenses we're unaware of. Hidden weapons, perhaps, or protective barriers, Zektar nodded thoughtfully. It was true that the mining station appeared to have minimal defensive capabilities, but humans were known for their technological innovation. It was possible they had some kind of hidden advantage. On the other hand, Veltok continued, accepting their invitation would give us access to their station. We could assess their defenses firsthand, determine the source of our technical difficulties, and potentially take control from within. You're suggesting we use their hospitality as a cover for infiltration?
It would be tactically sound, Veltok confirmed.
Zektar considered this. It was true that the invitation presented an unexpected opportunity for reconnaissance, and if the humans proved treacherous, the Krillian boarding party could quickly overwhelm the station's small crew. Very well, he decided. Prepare a boarding party of 50 officers, full combat gear, but concealed. We'll accept their invitation and see what these humans are planning. Should we maintain the pretense of diplomatic dining? Zektar's stomach growled again, louder this time. Yes, he said with what he hoped sounded like military decisiveness rather than hunger. We'll maintain the pretense. An hour later, the first Krydian shuttle approached Kepler Mining Station's docking bay. Sarah waited in the airlock with a small welcoming committee including Marcus, who had hastily cleaned the grease from his coveralls and attempted to look diplomatic. Nervous? Sarah asked quietly. Terrified, Marcus admitted, but also kind of excited. When's the last time we had visitors who weren't trying to sell us something? These visitors were trying to kill us, Alina pointed out. Details, Sarah said with a grin. The shuttle docked with a soft thud, and the airlock cycled through its pressurization sequence. There was a moment of tense silence before the inner door slid open, revealing Admiral Zektar and his boarding party. The Krillians were impressive in person, tall, scaled, with predatory grace and obvious intelligence behind their reptilian eyes. They wore what appeared to be formal military dress rather than battle armor, though Sarah suspected the outfits concealed various weapons. Admiral Zektar. Sarah stepped forward with a warm smile. Welcome to Kepler Mining Station. I'm Sarah Martinez, Station Administrator. Zektar studied her for a moment, clearly unsure of proper protocol for this unprecedented situation. Administrator Martinez, he said finally, his voice a deep rumble, we accept your invitation. Excellent. I hope you brought your appetites. Our chef has prepared something special. As they made their way through the station corridors, the Krillians maintained strict formation, but Sarah noticed several of them looking around with genuine curiosity. The mining station was functional rather than beautiful, but it was clearly well maintained and efficiently designed. How long have you operated this facility? Zektar asked. About 8 years now, Sarah replied. We're primarily extracting rare earth elements, but we've also got a nice little research lab and some of the best coffee in the sector. Coffee? Caffeinated beverage. Humans are practically addicted to it. I'll make sure you get to try some. The cafeteria had been transformed for the occasion. The utilitarian space now featured tablecloths, proper place settings, and the warm aroma of freshly prepared food. Several dozen Krillians could be accommodated comfortably, with room for the human crew to join them. This is unexpected, Commander Veltok murmured to his admiral. Indeed, Zektar replied, taking in the scene. The humans had clearly gone to considerable effort to make their guests comfortable. Long tables were set with what appeared to be their finest dinnerware, and serving stations displayed an impressive array of foods. Jamie Okafor emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. Admiral, welcome. I'm Jamie, head chef. I hope you're hungry because we've got quite a spread prepared. He gestured toward the serving area, where numerous dishes awaited. We've got the pastrami sandwiches Sarah mentioned, plus pulled pork, roasted chicken, beef stew, and some sides I think you'll enjoy. The aroma was intoxicating. Zektar found himself moving toward the food almost involuntarily, his Krillian instincts responding to the scent of properly prepared meat. Please, Sarah gestured toward the tables. Make yourselves comfortable. Jamie will explain each dish and we'll get everyone served. As the Krillians hesitantly took seats, Sarah couldn't help but notice their obvious hunger. When had these warriors last enjoyed a proper meal? Their empire might be vast and powerful, but it seemed to prioritize conquest over comfort. Marcus, she whispered to her chief engineer. Keep monitoring their ships. Let me know if anything changes. Marcus nodded and slipped away to a monitoring station concealed behind the serving area. The Krillian fleet remained in position, their weapons systems still mysteriously offline. Meanwhile, Jamie was beginning his culinary presentation with obvious enthusiasm. Now, The pastrami is a traditional human delicacy, cured beef brisket, seasoned with herbs and spices, sliced thin and served on rye bread with mustard. The pulled pork is slow-cooked in a tangy sauce until it's tender enough to shred. Admiral Zektar found himself genuinely interested in the descriptions. Krillian cuisine was primarily functional. Meat was meat, prepared for nutrition rather than flavor. The concept of seasoning, of slow cooking for tenderness rather than simply efficiency, was fascinating. "And this," Jamie continued, indicating a large pot, "is beef stew." Meat and vegetables cooked together until the flavors meld. It's comfort food. The kind of thing you eat when you want to feel, well, comforted. Comfort food? Veltok asked. Food that makes you feel better, Sarah explained. Not just physically nourished, but emotionally satisfied. Food prepared with care, meant to be shared with others. The concept was foreign to Krillian military culture, but looking around the cafeteria, Zektar could see evidence of its reality. The humans moved with easy familiarity, clearly comfortable with each other. Their interactions suggested genuine affection and mutual respect rather than mere professional cooperation. "Please," Jamie said, handing plates to the Krillians, "help yourselves. Try a little of everything if you'd like." What followed was perhaps the most unusual military encounter in galactic history. 50 hardened Krillian warriors, armed and dangerous, lined up at a buffet table to be served comfort food by enthusiastic humans. The initial tension gradually gave way to curiosity, then to genuine appreciation as the quality of the food became apparent. "This is remarkable," Zektar admitted to Sarah as they sat together at the head table. "The flavors are far more complex than anything I've experienced." "Jamie's a great chef," Sarah agreed. "He takes real pride in his work. Says there's no point in eating if you're not going to enjoy it." Around them, the atmosphere continued to warm. Krillian officers were actually engaging in conversation with human crew members, discussing everything from mining techniques to food preparation. Several were on their second helpings, and the sound of genuine laughter could be heard throughout the cafeteria. "Administrator," Zektar said quietly, "I must ask, why are you doing this? You know what we came here to do." Sarah met his gaze directly, because everyone deserves a good meal and some friendly conversation, even conquering space lizards. Despite himself, Zektar found his thermal signature shifting in what humans might recognize as amusement. Space lizards? Sorry, that probably came out wrong. Conquering reptilian warriors with impressive space fleets and excellent tactical formation flying. That's more accurate. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Sarah spoke again. "Can I ask you something? When's the last time you did something just because it felt good? Not because it was strategically necessary or militarily advantageous, but just because it made you happy?" The question struck Zektar like a physical blow. When had he last felt happiness? Satisfaction, yes, at successful campaigns. Pride at military achievements. But simple, uncomplicated pleasure? He couldn't remember. "It has been some time," he admitted. "That's a shame," Sarah said genuinely. "Life's too short to spend it all working. Even conquering the galaxy should leave time for enjoying a good meal with friends." "We are not friends," Zektar pointed out, though his tone lacked conviction. "Not yet," Sarah agreed cheerfully. "But we're working on it." Admiral Zektar stood at the observation deck of Kepler Mining Station, watching his fleet maintain position in the void. 3 hours had passed since the unexpected meal began, and his boarding party showed no signs of wanting to return to their ships. In fact, several of his officers were currently engaged in animated discussions with the human crew about something called dessert. "Sir," Commander Veltok approached, carrying what appeared to be a ceramic mug filled with dark liquid. "You should try this coffee substance. It's remarkable." Zektar accepted the mug skeptically. The liquid was hot and aromatic, with a complex bitter flavor that somehow managed to be pleasant. More surprisingly, within minutes of consumption, he felt more alert and focused than he had in weeks. "The humans consume this regularly?" he asked. "Multiple times per day, according to their engineer, Marcus. He claims he cannot function properly without it in the morning." Behind them, the cafeteria had evolved into something resembling a cultural exchange. Dr. Vasquez was explaining human physiology to a fascinated group of Krillian medical officers, while Jamie Okafor had somehow convinced several warriors to help him prepare something called chocolate chip cookies in the station's kitchen. "Admiral," Sarah approached with her characteristic warm smile, "I hope you're enjoying yourself. I wanted to ask you about something." "Speak freely, Administrator." Your fleet must consume enormous quantities of resources during these extended campaigns. Food, fuel, maintenance supplies. How do you manage the logistics? It was an innocent question, but one that touched on a growing problem within the Krillian Empire. Extended military campaigns were becoming increasingly difficult to sustain, and supply lines stretched across multiple star systems were vulnerable to disruption. We requisition what we need from conquered territories. Zektar replied carefully. That must be challenging when you're between conquests. Long stretches in space without access to fresh supplies or proper facilities. Sarah's observation was uncomfortably accurate. The Bloodfang hadn't seen a proper repair dock in 8 months, and several of his ships were running on minimal reserves. His crew survived on ration paste and recycled water, living in cramped quarters designed for short-term deployment rather than extended operations. We manage, he said stiffly. I'm sure you do. It's just, well, we've got more supplies here than we can use. Fresh food, quality coffee, even entertainment systems for downtime. Seems wasteful to let it go unused when there are people who could benefit from it. Marcus Chen chose that moment to join their conversation, wiping chocolate from his fingers with obvious satisfaction. Sarah, you should see what Jamie's doing in the kitchen. He's got half the Krillian crew learning to bake. Apparently their ships don't have proper cooking facilities. No proper cooking facilities? Sarah looked genuinely shocked. How do you prepare meals? Nutrient tubes, Veltok explained. All necessary vitamins and proteins delivered in efficient liquid form.
That sounds horrible,
Sarah said without thinking, then quickly added, I mean, I'm sure it's very practical for military operations. It is horrible, admitted Lieutenant Kresh, one of Zektar's younger officers who had wandered over from the cookie-making session. I joined the military 8 years ago and haven't tasted actual food since my graduation leave. An uncomfortable silence settled over the group. Zektar realized that his crew's enthusiasm for the meal went beyond simple hunger. They were experiencing something that had been missing from their lives for years. Lieutenant, he said warningly. With respect, sir, Kresh continued, emboldened by sugar and caffeine. When was the last time anyone in the fleet had a proper rest period? Real sleep in comfortable quarters, fresh food, recreational activities. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Zektar knew the answer. It had been over 2 years since his fleet had returned to Krillian space for resupply and crew rotation. They had become a nomadic force, moving from conquest to conquest without pause. Your crews must be exhausted, Sarah observed gently. All that traveling, fighting, living on emergency rations. It takes a toll. Before Zektar could respond, an alarm chimed throughout the station. Marcus immediately pulled out a communication device, his relaxed demeanor shifting to professional concern. Sarah, we've got incoming ships, 3 vessels, approaching fast from the outer system. What configuration? Sarah asked, suddenly all business. Military. Looks like Vorthan Raiders, the same group we had trouble with last year. Admiral Zektar's thermal signature immediately shifted to combat readiness. The Vorthan Raiders were notorious pirates who preyed on isolated outposts and merchant vessels. They were also known for their complete lack of honor or restraint. How many ships? He demanded. 3 cruisers, Marcus reported, consulting his instruments. About 400 crew total. They're armed with plasma weapons and shield disruptors. Sarah sighed with obvious annoyance. I thought we'd settled this with Captain Thane. He promised to leave us alone after our last conversation. Apparently his promise wasn't worth much, Marcus said grimly. They'll be in weapons range in 20 minutes. The transformation in the Krillian officers was immediate and dramatic. Professional warriors reasserted themselves, pushing aside the relaxed individuals who had been enjoying coffee and cookies moments before. Hands moved to concealed weapons, postures shifted to combat readiness, and tactical assessments began automatically. Administrator, Zektar said formally, my fleet can provide protection. Our weapons systems may be experiencing technical difficulties, but we can still position our ships between the raiders and your station. Sarah looked at him with genuine appreciation. That's very kind of you, Admiral, but I wouldn't want you to risk your ships for us. Besides, she added with a slight smile, we've dealt with the Vorthans before. With respect, Commander Veltok interjected, this station appears to have minimal defensive capabilities. 3 cruisers represent a significant threat. Oh, we're not defenseless, Sarah replied cheerfully. Marcus, would you mind demonstrating our security systems for our guests? Marcus grinned and moved to a control panel. With pleasure. Admiral, you might want to watch your fleet's sensor readings. Zektar activated his personal communicator, connecting to his flagship's bridge. "This is Admiral Zektar. Report fleet status." "Sir," came his navigation officer's voice, "we're detecting some unusual energy readings from the mining station. It appears to have extensive hidden defensive arrays." On the main display, Marcus was bringing various systems online. What had appeared to be a simple mining station was revealing itself as something far more sophisticated. Defensive shields powered up, weapon emplacements emerged from concealed positions, and sensor arrays deployed with military precision. "Impressive," Veltok murmured. "We prefer to keep a low profile," Sarah explained. "Mining stations make tempting targets, so we've learned to be prepared. But our real advantage isn't the hardware." "What do you mean?" Zektar asked. Before Sarah could answer, the communication system crackled to life. "Kepler Mining Station, this is Captain Thane of the Vorthan Raider Fleet. You will prepare for immediate boarding and surrender all valuable cargo. Resist and your station will be destroyed." Sarah picked up the communication device with obvious familiarity. "Hello, Captain Thane. This is Sarah Martinez. We've been through this before. The answer is still no." "Martinez!" Thane's voice carried obvious anger. "I warned you what would happen if you refused our protection arrangement. My fleet will reduce your pathetic station to scrap metal." "Actually," Sarah replied conversationally, "your fleet is about to experience some technical difficulties."
Marcus was working rapidly at his control station, fingers dancing across multiple keyboards.
Around the cafeteria, the Krillian officers watched in fascination as he accessed what appeared to be incredibly sophisticated hacking systems. "The Vorthans use outdated security protocols," Marcus explained to his audience. "Same vulnerabilities as most military fleets in this sector." On the tactical display, the three approaching Vorthan ships suddenly began to slow. Their weapons powered down, their shields flickered, and their communication systems started broadcasting random static. "What's happening to my ships?" Thane's voice crackled with interference. "Oh, just some minor technical issues," Sarah replied sweetly. "Nothing permanent. Your engines and life support are fine, but your weapons and navigation might be a bit unreliable for the next few hours." Admiral Zektar stared at the display, then at Marcus, then back at the display. "You disabled 3 military vessels in under 5 minutes? It helps that I had their system specifications from last time," Marcus admitted. "Plus, Vorthan security hasn't been updated in about 10 years. It's like breaking into a house when someone leaves the keys in the front door." The implications hit Zektar like a cold wind. His own fleet's mysterious technical difficulties, the weapon systems that refused to function, the targeting computers locked in safe mode, it hadn't been random malfunctions. "You've been inside our systems," he said quietly. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. "We prefer to think of it as preventive maintenance," Sarah said diplomatically. "Your weapons are perfectly functional. They're just temporarily unavailable for offensive operations. You could have destroyed us at any time," Veltok realized. "We could have made things very unpleasant for you," Marcus confirmed. "But that seemed like a waste of good technology and perfectly reasonable people." Lieutenant Kresh, still high on sugar and caffeine, started to laugh. "They invited us to lunch and then revealed they'd already captured our entire fleet without firing a shot."
"It's not capture," Sarah protested. "Think of it more as..."
"A temporary pause in hostilities while we get to know each other." Over the communication system, Captain Thane was growing increasingly frustrated. "Martinez, what have you done to my ships?" "The same thing we did to the Krillian fleet," Sarah replied. "Given everyone a chance to calm down and think about whether violence is really the best solution to whatever problem brought you here." "The Krillian fleet? What Krillian fleet?" Sarah gestured to Admiral Zektar, who reluctantly activated his communicator. "Captain Thane, this is Admiral Zektar of the Krillian Empire. I suggest you accept Administrator Martinez's hospitality. The food is excellent." The communication channel fell silent for several long moments before Thane's voice returned, considerably less confident than before. "Zektar? The Zektar? The pack leader who conquered the Altair system?" "The same," Zektar confirmed. "And I can assure you, Captain, that the Administrator's approach to conflict resolution is unique but effective." "What are you doing there?" Zektar looked around the cafeteria, taking in the scene of his warriors mingling easily with human crew members, sharing food and stories. "Learning," he said finally. "I am learning." Dr. Vasquez approached the group carrying a medical scanner. "Sarah, I've been running some health assessments on our Krylian friends. You should see these readings. Problems? Sarah asked with immediate concern. Malnutrition, chronic fatigue, vitamin deficiencies across the board. Eleanor reported. These warriors are literally running on empty. When did any of you last have proper medical care? The Krellian officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Military medicine in their empire focused on combat injuries and immediate threats. Preventive care and general wellness were considered luxuries. We have combat medics, Veltok said defensively. Combat medics are for fixing what's broken, Elena replied. I'm talking about maintaining what's working. Rest, proper nutrition, stress management, regular health monitoring. Basic stuff. The human doctor is correct, admitted ship's medic Valran, who had been quietly running her own scans. Our crew's baseline health has deteriorated significantly during this extended deployment. Sarah was already formulating plans. We've got excellent medical facilities here. Full diagnostic equipment, treatment beds, even a small surgical suite. Alina could run proper health assessments for anyone interested. You would provide medical care for a fleet that came here to attack you? Zekthar asked. Of course, Sarah replied, as if the question were absurd. You're here, you're hungry and tired, and probably haven't seen a real doctor in months. Why wouldn't we help? Jamie Okafor emerged from the kitchen with a tray of the promised cookies, still warm from the oven. The aroma was intoxicating, sweet, rich, completely unlike anything in the Krellian military diet. First batch is ready, he announced. Fair warning, they're addictive. I've seen people fight wars over my chocolate chip cookies. Lieutenant Kresh immediately reached for one, bit into it, and his thermal signature shifted dramatically. By the ancestors, he breathed. What is this? Happiness, Sarah replied with a grin, baked into convenient bite-sized portions. The cookies were distributed among both crews, and the effect was immediate. The combination of sugar, chocolate, and butter created what could only be described as culinary euphoria among the Krellians. This is a weapon, Veltok declared, examining his cookie with scientific interest. You could conquer systems with this. We prefer to make friends with it, Jamie replied, much more sustainable than conquest. Captain Thane's voice crackled over the communicator again, considerably more subdued. Administrator Martinez, my navigation officer says our systems won't come back online for several hours. That sounds about right, Marcus confirmed. Should give you time to think about whether you really want to resume hostilities with a station that just disabled 3 military vessels without breaking a sweat. What are my options here? Sarah brightened immediately. Well, you could try our hospitality approach. We've got plenty of food, comfortable quarters for extended visits, full medical and repair facilities. Much more pleasant than floating around in dead ships wondering when your life support might fail. There was another long pause before Thane responded. You're inviting me to dinner? After I threatened to destroy your station? Everyone makes mistakes, Sarah replied generously. The question is what you do afterward. You can keep making the same mistakes, or you can try something different. Admiral Zekthar found himself watching this exchange with growing fascination. In his experience, military conflicts ended with victory or defeat, conquest or destruction. The concept of transforming enemies into guests through hospitality was completely foreign to Krellian thinking. Captain, he said into his communicator, I recommend accepting the administrator's invitation. The coffee alone is worth the risk. Coffee? A stimulant beverage that enhances mental clarity and provides significant physiological benefits, Veltok explained helpfully, far superior to combat stimulants. Plus dessert, Kresh added, holding up his partially consumed cookie. Trust me, Captain. You need to experience this. 20 minutes later, Captain Thane's shuttle docked at Kepler mining station. The Vorthan leader emerged with obvious caution, accompanied by a small security detail that looked ready for trouble. What they found instead was Admiral Zekar of the Krellian Empire sitting at a table with the station administrator, drinking coffee and discussing mining efficiency, while his officers helped prepare more cookies in the kitchen. This is not what I expected, Thane admitted. It never is, Sarah replied warmly. I'm Sarah Martinez. Welcome to Kepler mining station. Are you hungry? The Vorthan captain looked around the cafeteria, taking in the bizarre scene of 2 potentially hostile fleet's crews mingling peacefully over shared food. Yes, actually. We've been living on emergency rations for weeks. Excellent. Jamie, we've got more guests. What followed was a repeat of the earlier cultural exchange, but with the added dynamic of traditional enemies learning to coexist in neutral territory. The Vorthans were initially suspicious of the Krylians, and vice versa, but shared appreciation for real food and comfortable surroundings gradually broke down barriers. Administrator, Captain Thane said after his first proper meal in months, I have to ask, why do this? You could have destroyed both our fleets. Instead, you're feeding us? Sarah considered the question seriously. Because destroying you doesn't solve anything. Tomorrow there would be another fleet, another group of raiders, another military force looking for easy targets. But if I can convince you that there are better ways to get what you need, you think you can reform pirates and conquerors with sandwiches and coffee? Thane asks skeptically.
I think people do desperate things when they're desperate, Sarah replied.
But most people aren't desperate because they're evil. They're desperate because they don't see better options. Admiral Zektar set down his coffee cup with careful precision. What are you suggesting, Administrator?
I'm suggesting that maybe there are alternatives to conquest and raiding.
Ways to get what you need without violence. Such as? Trade, Sarah said simply. Cooperation. Mutual benefit instead of zero-sum competition. The concept was radical by galactic standards where military might typically determine resource allocation. But sitting in the worn cafeteria, surrounded by evidence of human ingenuity and generosity, it didn't seem impossible. The Krillian Empire controls 47 systems, Zektar said slowly. We have resources, manufacturing capability, technological expertise. The Vorthang Confederation has mining operations, transportation networks, and processing facilities. Thane added thoughtfully. And we have innovation, agricultural products, and apparently very good coffee, Sarah concluded with a smile. Seems like the foundation for mutually beneficial relationships rather than endless warfare. Marcus approached the group with a concerned expression. Sarah, we've got another problem. Long-range sensors are picking up a distress signal from the outer system. Looks like a passenger liner in engine trouble. The immediate response from both military commanders was telling. Instead of calculating tactical advantages or potential threats, they began discussing rescue operations and resource allocation for humanitarian aid. How many passengers? Veltok asked. About 300, Marcus replied. Mixed species civilian transport. Their distress signal indicates complete engine failure. The Bloodfang has sufficient cargo capacity to accommodate refugees. Zekstar offered immediately. My ships have better medical facilities, Thane countered. If there are injuries, gentlemen, Sarah interrupted with obvious pleasure, I think we may have just discovered the beginning of a beautiful partnership. The rescue operation that began 6 hours after the unexpected dinner had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. 3 fleets that had arrived as potential enemies now worked in perfect coordination to assist the disabled passenger liner, Stellar Grace. Admiral Zektar stood on his bridge, watching Vorthan rescue shuttles dock with his flagship while human technical teams coordinated between all 3 fleets via quantum communicators. The efficiency was remarkable and completely at odds with every military doctrine he'd ever learned. Sir, his communications officer reported, the passenger manifest indicates we have civilians from 14 different species aboard the Stellar Grace. Some have specific atmospheric requirements. Coordinate with Captain Thane's medical officer, Zektar ordered, and request assistance from Dr. Vasquez. She seems remarkably knowledgeable about multi-species physiology. The transformation in his crew's attitude hadn't gone unnoticed. Officers who had been ready for conquest 12 hours earlier were now focused on humanitarian logistics with the same professional dedication. More surprising, they seemed genuinely energized by the change. Commander Veltok approached with a data pad. Sir, I've been reviewing the rescue coordination protocols the humans suggested. Their approach to multi-fleet operations is innovative. Explained. Rather than maintaining separate command structures and competing for authority, they've created integrated task forces based on capability rather than chain of command. Vorthan ships handle medical evacuation because they have the best facilities. Our vessels provide heavy lift capacity. The humans coordinate communications and technical support. And it's working? More efficiently than any joint operation I've witnessed, Veltok admitted. There's been no territorial disputes, no conflicting orders, no delays due to interfleet politics. Through the view screen, Zektar could see the Stellar Grace surrounded by rescue vessels from all 3 fleets. Cargo shuttles moved back and forth in careful choreography, transferring passengers and supplies. It looked less like a military operation and more like a community effort. Sir, the navigation officer called out. Administrator Martinez is requesting permission to come aboard. For what purpose? She says she has coffee and wants to discuss something called operational optimization. 15 minutes later, Sarah Martinez stood in the Bloodfang's command center, looking around with obvious interest. The Kralian flagship was impressive, sleek, powerful, and clearly designed for both speed and combat effectiveness. "This is beautiful," she said genuinely. "Your engineers really know their work." Zektar found himself oddly pleased by the compliment. "The Bloodfang has served the Empire for 8 years without major failure. I can see why you're proud of her, but I notice your crew quarters are pretty cramped, and your food preparation areas are minimum," Zektar finished. "Military efficiency requires certain sacrifices." Sarah handed him a steaming mug of coffee. Somehow she'd managed to bring proper brewing equipment aboard.
Does it, though?
"I mean, you've been in space for months at a time. Your crew lives here, works here, fights here. Shouldn't it feel like home rather than just a military installation?" The question was uncomfortable because it highlighted something Zektar had been trying to ignore. His crew's enthusiasm for their time on Kepler mining station wasn't just about the food. It was about the entire environment. The humans had created a space where people genuinely wanted to be. "Comfort is a luxury we cannot afford during active campaigns," he said carefully. "Is it though?" Sarah pulled out a portable display and activated it, showing the rescue operations progress. "Look at your crew's performance over the last 6 hours. Productivity is up 30%, coordination errors are down to essentially zero, and crew morale indicators are higher than they've been in months. You've been monitoring our crew morale?" Marcus set up some basic biometric tracking with your medical officer's permission. Nothing invasive, just general wellness indicators. Your people are performing better when they're comfortable and well-fed. The data was undeniable. Despite the challenging rescue operation, his crew showed fewer signs of stress and fatigue than during routine military operations. "What are you suggesting, Administrator?" "I'm suggesting that maybe military efficiency and crew comfort aren't mutually exclusive. Maybe treating your people well actually makes them more effective." Before Zektar could respond, Captain Thane's voice crackled over the communication system. "Admiral, Administrator, you need to see this. We've got a situation with the passenger liner." They quickly moved to the main display, where Captain Thane appeared via video link from his own ship. Behind him, the Stellar Grace was visible through his bridge windows. "What's the nature of the situation?" Sarah asked. "It's not mechanical," Thane replied grimly. "According to the passengers we've interviewed, this wasn't an accidental engine failure. The ship was sabotaged. The implications were immediately clear to all 3 commanders. Someone had deliberately disabled a civilian transport in deep space, far from any normal shipping lanes or rescue services. "Piracy?" Veltok suggested. "Worse," Tan said. "According to the passenger manifest, the Stellar Grace was carrying a delegation of trade representatives from the Centauri Commercial Alliance. They were en route to negotiate new shipping agreements that would reduce tariffs across 17 systems." Sarah's expression darkened. Someone wanted to stop those negotiations. "The question is who," Zektar said, "and whether they're planning to finish what they started." Marcus's voice joined the conversation from Kepler station.
Actually, we might have an answer to that.
"Long-range sensors are picking up another fleet approaching. 6 ships, heavy cruisers, flying hegemony colors." The hegemony was a loose alliance of corporate interests that controlled shipping and trade in several key sectors. They were known for using economic leverage and occasionally military force to maintain their monopolies. "How long until they arrive?" Zektar asked. 4 hours at their current speed," Marcus replied. "And based on their formation and approach vector, they're not coming to help with rescue operations." Sarah was already moving toward the communication console. "Captain Thane, can your ships get the passengers to safety?" "Not all of them," Thane admitted. "We can evacuate maybe 2/3. But the Stellar Grace is too damaged to move, and some passengers require specialized life support that we can't provide during transport." "The Bloodfang can provide defensive cover," Zektar offered, "but 6 hegemony cruisers represent significant firepower." "Actually," Sarah said thoughtfully, "maybe we don't need to fight them." Both commanders turned to look at her with expressions of disbelief. "Sarah," Thane said carefully, "these are the same people who sabotaged a civilian transport. They're not going to be interested in diplomatic solutions."
Maybe not, Sarah agreed. But they might be interested in economic ones.
She activated her portable communicator and connected to Marcus back on the station. "Marcus, I need you to run a full analysis on hegemony trade routes and profit margins. Focus on their vulnerabilities."
What kind of vulnerabilities?
Marcus asked. The kind that might make them reconsider whether attacking 3 fleets in a mining station is really in their best interests. While Marcus worked, Sarah turned to the 2 military commanders. Tell me about your fleet's capabilities. Not just weapons, everything. The Krillian fleet has advanced manufacturing facilities, Zektar said slowly. We can produce most of our own spare parts and equipment during extended deployments. My ships have extensive cargo capacity and some of the best navigation computers in the sector, Thane added. We've been running supply lines between remote systems for years, and Kepler Station has some of the most sophisticated mining and processing equipment available, Sarah continued. Plus, Marcus has managed to hack into pretty much every major shipping database in the galaxy. You're suggesting an economic alliance? Veltok asked. I'm suggesting that maybe the hegemony's monopoly isn't as secure as they think it is. Marcus's voice crackled over the communicator with obvious excitement. Sarah, you're going to love this. The hegemony's profit margins are completely dependent on their control of 3 key shipping routes. If those routes faced competition, their entire economic model would collapse. Define competition, Zektar said with growing interest. Well, Marcus replied, hypothetically speaking, if someone had fast ships with advanced navigation systems, manufacturing capabilities for producing trade goods, and access to raw materials from mining operations, they could bypass hegemony routes entirely, Thane finished.
Not just bypass, Sarah corrected.
They could offer better prices, faster delivery, and more reliable service. The hegemony maintains their monopoly through intimidation and artificial scarcity. Remove those advantages, and their entire power structure becomes vulnerable, Zektar concluded. The approaching hegemony fleet suddenly seemed less like an overwhelming threat and more like a negotiating opportunity. Marcus, Sarah said, open a channel to the hegemony commander. Let's see if they're interested in discussing alternatives to violence. The response came 20 minutes later, in the form of Admiral Korax, the hegemony's sector commander. He appeared on screen as a typical corporate executive, polished, confident, and completely convinced of his own superiority. Kepler Mining Station, Korax said smoothly. I understand you've been interfering with legitimate salvage operations. If by salvage operations you mean rescuing passengers from a ship you sabotaged, Sarah replied cheerfully, then yes, we've been interfering quite enthusiastically. Korax's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened slightly. I have no knowledge of any sabotage. My fleet is here to investigate reports of piracy in this sector. Funny thing about piracy, Captain Thane interjected, his voice carrying dangerous amusement. I used to be a pirate, so I know what it looks like. This doesn't look like piracy. This looks like corporate assassination, Zektar added coldly. Something the Krillian Empire takes very seriously. For the first time, Korax showed genuine surprise. Admiral Zektar, what is the Krillian Empire's interest in this matter? The same as the Vorthan Confederation's interest. Thane said, we don't like bullies who target civilians. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Admiral Korax, I think we have a fundamental misunderstanding here. You seem to think you're in a position to make demands, but looking at the tactical situation, Marcus's voice joined the conversation from his position on Kepler Station. Admiral, you might want to check your fleet's navigation systems. You seem to be experiencing some technical difficulties. On the screen, Korax's confident expression began to crack, as his officers reported the same mysterious malfunctions that had affected both the Krillian and Vorthan fleets. What have you done to my ships? Korax demanded. Given them a chance to reconsider their life choices, Sarah replied. Just like we did for Admiral Zektar and Captain Thane. This is an act of war. Actually, Zektar said mildly, this is an act of hospitality. Administrator Martinez is about to invite you to dinner. Dinner? Sarah nodded enthusiastically. We've got fresh coffee, excellent sandwiches, and some cookies that will absolutely change your perspective on conflict resolution. Plus, I think you'll be very interested in a business proposition we'd like to discuss. I am not interested in your food or your propositions.
That's unfortunate, Thane said, because the alternative is explaining to your corporate board why you started a shooting war with 3 fleets when you could have negotiated a profitable arrangement instead.
Korax fell silent as the implications sank in. His fleet was disabled, facing superior numbers, and any military action would likely result in significant casualties and material losses. What kind of business proposition? He asked reluctantly. Sarah smiled. The kind that could triple your profit margins while eliminating most of your operational risks. But it does require giving up the whole intimidation and monopoly approach to business. I'm listening. The Centauri Commercial Alliance wants to establish new trade routes, right? More efficient shipping, lower costs, better service. The hegemony sees this as a threat to your existing monopoly. Obviously. But what if instead of being a threat, it became an opportunity? What if the hegemony became a partner in the new trade network instead of an obstacle to it? Marcus's voice provided supporting data. Admiral, the numbers are pretty compelling. Current hegemony trade routes average 42 days transit time with 18% cargo loss due to piracy and mechanical failures. The proposed new routes would cut transit time to 28 days with less than 3% losses. Impossible, Korak said automatically. Actually, completely possible, Zektar interjected. Krillian manufacturing facilities can provide replacement parts and repairs at intermediate stops. Vorthan navigation systems can optimize route efficiency. Human technical expertise can prevent most mechanical failures before they occur. And everyone profits more than they do under the current system, Sarah concluded. The Alliance gets better service, the hegemony gets higher volume with lower overhead, and everyone else gets access to goods and services at reasonable prices.
Korax was clearly struggling to process the concept. You're suggesting cooperation instead of competition?
I'm suggesting that competition doesn't have to be destructive, Sarah replied.
Sometimes the best way to beat your rivals is to make them your partners. The communication channel fell silent for several minutes while Korax consulted with his officers. Finally, his image reappeared on screen. Administrator Martinez, he said carefully, assuming I were interested in this proposition, what would be required from the hegemony? Simple, Sarah replied with her characteristic warm smile. Stop trying to kill people, start trying to help them, and come have dinner. We'll work out the details over coffee and dessert. This is highly irregular. So is rescuing passengers from sabotaged ships, Thane pointed out. So is 3 potentially hostile fleets working together on humanitarian operations. So is reforming pirates and conquerors with good food and friendly conversation. But it works, Zekdar added. More importantly, it works better than the alternatives. Another long pause before Korax responded. Very well, I will accept your invitation. But I want assurances that this is not some elaborate trap. Admiral, Sarah said gently, if we wanted to destroy your fleet, we would have done it already. Marcus has had access to your systems for the last hour. The last hour? About the time you started broadcasting threats, Marcus confirmed cheerfully. But don't worry, I was very careful not to damage anything important. Your ships will be perfectly functional once we finish our conversation. Admiral Korak stared at the screen for several seconds before beginning to laugh. It started as a low chuckle, but quickly grew into genuine amusement. You disabled 4 separate military fleets without firing a single shot, convinced traditional enemies to work together on rescue operations, and now you're proposing to restructure interstellar commerce over dinner and dessert. That's a pretty accurate summary, Sarah agreed. This is either the most elaborate con in galactic history, or you've actually discovered something revolutionary. There's an easy way to find out, Sarah replied with a grin. Come try the coffee. If you're not impressed, you can always go back to shooting people later. 6 hours later, Admiral Korak sat in Kepler Station's cafeteria, drinking his 3rd cup of coffee and reviewing trade route projections with the enthusiasm of a convert. The passengers from the Stellar Grace had been safely evacuated and were receiving medical care across all 4 fleets. More importantly, the foundation for what would become the most successful commercial alliance in galactic history was being negotiated over chocolate chip cookies and friendly conversation. The efficiency improvements alone would pay for the infrastructure investments within 18 months, Korax was explaining to a fascinated group of officers from all 4 fleets. But the real advantage is scalability. This model could be applied to dozens of trade routes. What about the political implications? Asked Commander Veltok. The Krillian Empire would need to authorize commercial partnerships with former enemies. Former enemies? Captain Fan repeated thoughtfully. I like the sound of that. Admiral Zektar was studying shipping manifests with the focus he usually reserved for battle plans. The resource allocation is elegant, he admitted. Everyone contributes what they do best. Everyone benefits from the collective result. Sarah looked around the table at the unlikely gathering of military commanders planning peaceful commerce instead of preparing for war. Not bad for a day's work, she said with satisfaction. Administrator, Admiral Korak said formally, I believe the Hegemony Board of Directors will be very interested in this proposal. Assuming, of course, that we can maintain the same level of cooperation that you've demonstrated here. That's the easy part, Sarah replied. The hard part is remembering that everyone you meet is fighting their own battles, facing their own challenges, trying to solve their own problems. Most conflicts happen because people assume the worst about each other instead of looking for ways to help. You really believe that? Korax asked. I believe that people are generally reasonable when they're not desperate, scared, or hungry, Sarah said. Remove those factors and most problems become much easier to solve. Marcus approached the table with a concerned expression.
Sarah, we've got a priority communication coming in from Earth.
Looks like Starfleet Command has some questions about why 3 potentially hostile fleets are currently docked at our station. Sarah sighed. Politicians. They hear about successful diplomacy and immediately assume something has gone wrong. What will you tell them? Zekthar asked with genuine curiosity. Sarah stood up and straightened her uniform. The truth. That we solved a complex interstellar crisis with good food, honest conversation, and a willingness to look for solutions instead of someone to blame. And if they don't believe you, Sarah grinned and gestured toward the cafeteria full of former enemies now working together on humanitarian and commercial projects, I'll invite them to dinner. It worked on you. 3 months later, Kepler Mining Station had become something unprecedented in galactic history. A neutral meeting ground where former enemies conducted business, resolved disputes, and occasionally shared meals that had become legendary across 17 star systems. Sarah Martinez stood in the newly expanded observation deck, watching a scene that would have been impossible to imagine just a few months earlier. Krillian cargo vessels worked alongside Vorthan transport ships to load refined metals bound for hegemony distribution centers. The coordination was flawless, the efficiency remarkable, and the profit substantial for everyone involved. The quarterly reports are in, Marcus Chen announced, approaching with a data pad and his customary grin. Trade volume is up 400%, delivery times are down 60%, and customer satisfaction ratings are... He paused dramatically. Perfect. Literally perfect. We haven't had a single complaint in 6 weeks. That seems statistically unlikely, Dr. Elena Vasquez observed from her position at a monitoring station. It would be, Marcus agreed, if we were still operating under the old competitive model. But when everyone profits from cooperation instead of conflict, customer service becomes a shared priority rather than someone else's problem. Through the viewport, Sarah watched Admiral Zektar's flagship, the Bloodfang, maneuver alongside Captain Thane's vessel, Windchaser. Both ships showed obvious modifications, expanded cargo bays, improved crew quarters, and what appeared to be recreational facilities. Military vessels were being converted for long-term deployment in support roles rather than conquest.
How are our guests settling in? Sarah asked.
Better than expected, Elena replied, consulting her medical reports. The Krillian officers assigned to permanent station duty show improved health markers across all categories. Better nutrition, regular sleep cycles, stress reduction. Captain Thane's crew is adapting well to their new security and logistics roles. And Admiral Korax? Marcus laughed. He's in Conference Room 3 giving a presentation to Hegemony board members about revolutionary approaches to interstellar commerce. Direct quote from his communication. We've discovered that making customers happy is more profitable than threatening them. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. 3 major shipping corporations had attempted to disrupt the new trade alliance through political pressure and economic sabotage. 2 pirate fleets had tested the resolve of the combined security forces. A diplomatic incident involving territorial disputes between the Altair Consortium and the Vega Collective had required delicate negotiation. Each challenge had been resolved through the same approach that had started the alliance. Invitation to dialogue, shared meals, and patient search for mutually beneficial solutions. Sarah. Jamie Okafor's voice crackled over the intercom from the kitchen. We've got another situation developing. 3 ships just dropped out of hyperspace and they're broadcasting distress signals. What's their condition? Sarah asked, already moving toward the communication center. Unclear. The signals are fragmented, but it looks like engine failure and possible casualties. Unknown configuration, flying no recognized flags. Admiral Zektar's voice joined the conversation through the communication system. Administrator, this is Zektar. My sensors indicate the distressed vessels are of Syndicate origin. Sarah felt a chill. The Syndicate was different from previous threats they'd encountered. Where the Krillians had been honorable warriors and the Vorthans opportunistic raiders, the Syndicate was something darker. Organized criminals who specialized in slavery, drug trafficking, and systematic exploitation of vulnerable populations. How many ships? She asked. 3 vessels. Captain Thane's voice added to the conversation. But they're badly damaged. Whatever happened to them, they're in genuinely desperate condition. Admiral Corax's voice joined the discussion from the conference room. Administrator, the hegemony has extensive intelligence files on syndicate operations. These are not people who can be reformed through hospitality. Everyone deserves a chance, Sarah replied automatically, though her voice carried less conviction than usual. Sarah, Marcus said quietly, I'm getting some disturbing readings from their ships. Life support is failing on all 3 vessels, but the crew composition is unusual. Define unusual. Mixed species, but the distribution is wrong. Too many juveniles, too many individuals showing signs of malnutrition and physical abuse. This doesn't look like a normal crew. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The syndicate ships weren't crewed by willing participants. They were carrying cargo that happened to be sentient. Slaves, Elena said grimly, reaching the same conclusion. Sarah's jaw tightened with anger, but her voice remained controlled. How many? Best estimate is around 300 individuals across all 3 ships, Marcus reported. And Sarah, some of the life signs are very weak. Whatever's wrong with their ships, people are dying. The ethical dilemma was immediate and complex. The syndicate represented everything Sarah opposed: cruelty, exploitation, the reduction of sentient beings to commodities. But the people on those ships were victims who needed rescue, regardless of who controlled them. All right, she said finally. Emergency protocols, full humanitarian response. But I want security teams from all 4 fleets ready for anything. Sarah, Admiral Zekdar's voice carried unusual urgency. Syndicate vessels often have self-destruct systems designed to eliminate evidence of their operations. If they believe rescue operations will expose their activities, they might kill everyone aboard rather than face prosecution, Captain Thane finished. Then we make sure they don't feel threatened enough to activate those systems, Sarah said firmly. Normal approach, offer assistance, food, medical aid. But this time we're ready for betrayal. The rescue operation that followed was unlike any they'd attempted. Syndicate personnel were clearly suspicious of offers of help, expecting tricks or traps. The rescued slaves were traumatized, malnourished, and terrified of their captors. Some couldn't believe they were actually being freed. Dr. Vasquez worked with medical teams from all 4 fleets to provide care for nearly 300 individuals representing dozen species. The station's medical facilities were stretched beyond capacity, but the combined resources of the Alliance proved sufficient. Status report, Sarah requested as she moved through the converted cargo bays that had become temporary refugee centers. Physically, most of them will recover, Eleanor reported tiredly. Malnutrition, dehydration, various untreated injuries, but nothing permanent. Psychologically, that's going to take longer. Sarah nodded, watching a group of young Altairian refugees receiving food and medical attention from Krillian medical officers. The sight of former conquerors, gently caring for victims of exploitation, was both heartwarming and surreal. What about the syndicate crew? Detained on their own ships under guard from all 4 fleets, Admiral Zektar reported through his communicator. They're demanding to speak with legal representatives and claiming diplomatic immunity. Diplomatic immunity for slavers? Sarah's voice carried rare anger. The syndicate operates under corporate charters from several systems that technically grant them legal protection, Admiral Corax explained. It's a loophole that's allowed them to operate with impunity. Captain Thane's voice carried grim amusement. Lucky for us, none of our fleets recognize those charters. Pirates don't generally worry about legal technicalities. We're not pirates anymore, Sarah reminded him. No, Thane agreed. But we remember how to be pirates when the situation calls for it. The solution, when it came, was characteristically elegant and completely unexpected. Admiral Zektar presented it during an emergency alliance meeting in the station's main conference room. The syndicate's legal protection depends on maintaining corporate fiction, he explained. They claim to be legitimate traders engaged in contract labor acquisition. But the rescued individuals' testimonies document systematic abuse, illegal detention, and violation of dozens of interstellar laws. Unfortunately, Admiral Corax interjected, prosecuting them would require cooperation from the same corrupt systems that granted their charters in the first place.
What if we don't prosecute them? Sarah asked thoughtfully. All 4 commanders turned to look at her with expressions of confusion and concern.
Sarah, Marcus said carefully, these people are slavers. They're responsible for unimaginable suffering.
Yes, they are, Sarah agreed.
But prosecution means years of legal proceedings, endless appeals, and the likelihood that they'll eventually walk free on technicalities. Meanwhile, their operation continues. What are you suggesting? Admiral Zektar asked. Sarah activated the room's main display, showing shipping routes and economic data. The syndicate's business model depends on controlling specific trade routes and having access to markets for their products. What if those routes became unavailable? What if those markets disappeared? That economic warfare, Admiral Korax said with growing interest. Eliminate their ability to operate rather than trying to punish them after the fact. The new trade alliance covers most of their traditional routes, Captain Thane realized. If we refuse to deal with them, cut them out of shipping networks, deny them access to commercial facilities, their entire operation becomes unprofitable, Marcus concluded. Brilliant. More than unprofitable, Admiral Zektar added with predatory satisfaction. If they can't move their cargo, can't access markets, can't obtain supplies, they become vulnerable to the same kind of desperation that drives their victims. We're not trying to make them desperate, Sarah corrected firmly. We're trying to make their criminal activities impossible while giving them opportunities to choose legitimate alternatives. The plan that emerged was comprehensive and decisive. The Trade Alliance would blacklist all syndicate operations, share intelligence about their activities, and provide economic alternatives to any system currently dealing with them. Meanwhile, the rescued slaves would be given medical care, counseling, and assistance returning to their home systems or finding new lives elsewhere. What about the syndicate crews currently in our custody? Elena asked. We offer them the same thing we've offered everyone else, Sarah said. A choice. Continue working for an organization that's about to become extinct or find something better to do with their lives. You want to rehabilitate slavers? Elena's voice carried disbelief. I want to eliminate slavery, Sarah replied. And sometimes the most effective way to stop bad people from doing bad things is to give them better options. The conversations that followed were among the most difficult Sarah had ever undertaken. Syndicate personnel were suspicious, hostile, and convinced that any offer of clemency was a trap. Many had been involved in their operations for years, some since childhood. The concept of legitimate work was foreign to them. But gradually, carefully, with the same patience she'd shown with the Krylian fleet, Sarah began to make progress. Food helped. Medical care helped. The obvious prosperity and cooperation of the Trade Alliance helped. Seeing former enemies working together peacefully was more persuasive than any speech about the benefits of legitimate commerce. The breakthrough came when Senior Operator Vexlin, second in command of the Syndicate fleet, asked to speak privately with Sarah. Administrator, the Nexarian woman said carefully, I want to understand something. You've disabled our ships, captured our crew, freed our cargo, and destroyed our operation. But you're offering us food, medical care, and jobs. Why? Sarah considered the question seriously. Because making you my enemy doesn't solve the problem. There will always be another syndicate, another group willing to exploit the desperate and vulnerable. But if I can convince you that there are better ways to make a living, you think we can be reformed? I think people do terrible things when they believe they don't have choices, Sarah replied. But you have choices now. The question is, what you're going to do with them. Vexlin was silent for a long moment. My people have skills, navigation, cargo handling, security operations. But legitimate employers don't generally hire former slavers. They do if former slavers are recommended by the Trade Alliance, Sarah pointed out. We need personnel for expanded operations, new routes, security details. People who understand how criminal organizations operate make excellent security consultants.
You're serious about this?
Completely serious. But it has to be your choice. No one's forcing you to give up your old life. We're just making it unprofitable and offering you something better. 2 weeks later, the transformation was complete. The Syndicate ships had been retrofitted as